There is a car that survived 13 years without changing its face. Same shark nose, same thin pillars, same aggressive stance. But here's what almost nobody noticed. Somewhere in the middle of that 13-year run, BMW performed a secret operation. They unbolted the body and slid a completely different car underneath it. They changed its bones, its nervous system, even the way it thought. And they did it so quietly that even the journalists of the time barely mentioned it. This was the BMW 6 Series, the E24, a car that looked like it refused to change, but underneath, it was transforming from a mechanical predator into something else entirely. By the time production ended in 1989, it had become a machine that its creators from 1976 would barely recognize. The shark had evolved, but you had to open the hood to see it. This is the story of a car caught between two worlds and the invisible line that divided them. To understand why this car matters, you have to look at the company that built it. In 1975, BMW was not the industrial giant we know today. They were survivors. The Neue Klasse sedans had pulled them back from the brink of bankruptcy in the 60s, but their coffers were not overflowing. They were fighting for every inch of ground against the established luxury of Mercedes-Benz and the sheer volume of the American giants. They were surviving, but they were not yet dominating. They needed a flagship. They needed a car that would define them for the next decade. The initial plan from the board of directors was safe. It was logical, and it was completely wrong. They looked at their existing coupe, the elegant E9, and decided to simply make it taller. They wanted a car that was easy to get in and out of. They envisioned a practical two-door sedan for wealthy, older drivers who wanted comfort above all else. It was designed by committee in its worst form. It would have been a comfortable, upright, and utterly forgettable vehicle. It would have been a car without a soul. Then came Bob Lutz. He was the newly appointed board member for sales, recruited from General Motors and Opel. He walked into the design studio, looked at the full-scale clay model of this tall, awkward coupe, and he refused to accept it. He understood something the others missed. He argued that a flagship is not about practicality. It is about desire. It is about emotion. He told the board that a BMW coupe had to look fast even when it was standing still. It had to promise aggression. It had to look like it owned the left lane of the Autobahn. Lutz championed a different vision. He turned to Paul Brock, a French designer who had joined BMW in 1970. Brock took the soft curves of the era and gave them tension. The result was a masterclass in proportion. The hood was long and flat. The cabin was airy, with thin pillars that seemed too delicate to hold the roof. The tail was short and chopped, but the defining feature was the front. The grille did not stand vertical. It did not lean back for aerodynamics. It leaned forward. It reached out to grab the air before the car even arrived. This was the shark nose. It was a design that implied speed through aggression rather than wind tunnel efficiency. It was confident. It was arrogant in the best possible way. It told the world that this car was not just transport. It was a statement. This design decision changed the trajectory of the company. If they had built the tall sedan, BMW might have remained a niche manufacturer of practical cars. Instead, the E24 established them as the creators of the ultimate driving machine. It was a risk. In a time of fuel shortages and economic fear, they built a car that looked like a predator. It was low. It was wide. It demanded attention. When you look at these early sketches, you see the intentionality. Every line had a purpose. There was a heavy mechanical feel to the shape. It had visual weight. It looked like it was carved from a single block of steel rather than stamped from sheets of tin. This was the era before computer-aided design smoothed away all the character. You can feel the hand of the draftsman in the curves. You can see the human decisions in the way the glass meets the metal. The design was finally approved. The shark was ready to swim. The body was beautiful. It was a triumph of styling, but beneath that stunning metal skin, there was a problem. The initial execution had a major flaw that would threaten the very existence of these early cars. The design was secure, but the manufacturing process was about to create a vulnerability that no one saw coming. And if you own one of the earliest examples, there is a nameplate on your door jamb that might as well be a warning label. The production logistics of the early 6 Series were not simple. In the mid-70s, BMW faced a capacity problem. They did not have the floor space to build this new flagship alongside their high-volume sedans. So, they turned to a partner with a storied name, Karmann. Based in Osnabrück, Karmann was a legendary independent coach builder. They were famous for turning metal into art. For the first phase of production, from January 1976 to August 1977, the bodies were constructed and assembled by Karmann. If you ever have the chance to inspect a 6 Series from this specific window, open the door on the driver's side. Look closely at the door jamb. You might see a specific build plate that bears the name Karmann. For a collector, this is a fascinating detail. It connects the car to a lineage of hand-built German coupes that dates back decades. It makes the car special. It marks it as one of the few. But for a mechanic or a restorer, that plate is a warning label. The beauty of the Karmann bodies concealed a fatal flaw. It is a phenomenon known among owners as karmann rot. While the craftsmen at Osnabrück were masters of welding and shaping, their rust prevention methods were outdated. The E24 had a complex shape. It had deep fenders and intricate structural sills. These cavities became traps. Moisture would find its way in, often through sunroof drains that were routed imperfectly, and it would sit there. The water would work silently against the unprotected steel. The result was catastrophic oxidation. The cars would look perfect on the outside, with their paint shining under the showroom lights. But underneath, the structural rockers were turning to dust. The jack points would collapse when you tried to lift the car. The front fenders would bubble from beneath the paint. This vulnerability means that the earliest, purest examples of the design are statistically the rarest today. Most of them simply dissolved. BMW could not allow this to continue. A flagship car required flagship durability. In August 1977, the company made a strategic shift. They moved the final assembly and the critical painting process to their own factory in Dingolfing. This was a move to secure what they called flagship purity. By bringing the process in-house, BMW could apply their own advanced rust-proofing techniques. They used better primers and seam sealers. They ensured that the body would last as long as the engine. This transition marked the end of the coach-built era for the 6 Series. The later cars from Dingolfing are robust. They are survivors. But the early Karmann-built cars still hold a certain allure because they lacked the heavy undercoating and sound deadening of the later models. They feel different. They are lighter. They are louder. There is a delicacy to the way they drive that the heavier, more solid cars never quite replicated. They transmit more of the road texture through the chassis. They offer a raw experience that was slowly polished away in the years that followed. The body was now secure. The metal was protected against the elements. But as the 70s drew to a close, a new problem emerged. The shark nose looked like a spaceship from the future, but underneath that long hood, it was relying on engineering that was becoming obsolete. The suspension geometry was old. The chassis was aging, and the world was about to go digital. What happened next was extraordinary. BMW was about to perform surgery on a car that was already in showrooms, replacing its entire skeleton without changing a single body panel. And most buyers never even noticed. To the casual observer, standing on a sidewalk in 1982, the 6 Series looked exactly as it had 6 years prior. The shark nose still cut the air with the same aggression. The pillars remained impossibly thin. The exhaust still exited slightly off-center. But beneath that familiar steel skin, the engineers in Munich had performed a massive, invisible transplant. They essentially unbolted the body and slid a completely new car underneath it. This was the transition from the E12 chassis to the E28 platform. It is the single most important moment in the history of the vehicle, yet it is often completely overlooked because it did not change the silhouette. The early cars were based on 1972 technology. They were robust, but they were crude. By 1982, that architecture was obsolete. BMW made the decision to migrate the flagship coupe onto the chassis of the second-generation 5 Series. This ensured that the coupe would not just survive, but thrive, as it now shared its skeleton with a high-volume sedan that would be produced in the millions. For the modern collector, this is the difference between a car you can fix with parts from a catalog and a car you have to fix by fabricating metal in a machine shop. The most profound effect of this transplant was felt in the corners. The early cars possessed a dark reputation. They utilized a rear suspension design with semi-trailing arms set at a 20-degree sweep angle. It was a compact design, but it had a nasty habit. If a driver entered a corner too fast and panicked, lifting their foot off the throttle, the weight of the car would lurch forward. The rear suspension would unload, and due to that steep angle, the rear wheels would tuck under, gaining positive camber and towing out. In plain English, the rear tires would suddenly decide to steer the car sideways. It was known as lift-off oversteer, and it sent many early 6 Series spiraling into ditches. With the 1982 update, the engineers altered the geometry. They reduced that sweep angle to 13 degrees. It sounds like a minor adjustment on a blueprint, but on the road, it was transformative. The rear end became predictable. It settled down. The car retained its agility, but it lost its malice. It was no longer waiting for you to make a mistake so it could punish you. It became a partner rather than a challenger. But as the mechanicals were refined, something else was creeping into the cabin. The digital age was dawning, and it arrived in the form of a small row of green lights in the instrument cluster. This was the service interval board. It seemed like genius at the time, a glimpse of the intelligent future. But hidden inside this innovation was a slow-acting poison that would eventually destroy the very gauges meant to protect the engine. Before this moment, car maintenance was a matter of reading the odometer. You changed the oil every 3,000 miles because the manual said so. The service interval board changed the relationship. It used an algorithm. It monitored engine speed, distance traveled, and the number of cold starts to calculate the actual degradation of the oil. It was brilliant. It was the first step toward the car telling the driver what it needed, rather than the driver telling the car what to do. However, this innovation carried the seeds of its own destruction. To remember the data when the ignition was off, the circuit board relied on small nickel-cadmium batteries soldered deep inside the cluster. The engineers did not anticipate that these cars would still be cherished 40 years later. Over time, those batteries fail. They leak corrosive acid onto the delicate copper traces of the motherboard. It is a slow, invisible cancer. It destroys the gauges from the inside out. It is a cruel irony that the very system designed to ensure the engine's longevity is often the first part of the car to die. Under the hood, the changes were just as significant. The trusty analog fuel injection systems of the 70s were replaced by Bosch Motronic. This was the arrival of the black box. In the older cars, you could adjust the timing with a light gun and a wrench. You could see the distributor turn. You could understand the mechanical relationship between the spark and the piston. Motronic ended that. A computer now decided the ignition timing based on a digital map. It was more efficient. It was more powerful. It allowed for cleaner emissions and better fuel economy, but it also closed the hood to the amateur mechanic. The era of the driveway tune-up was ending. The car was becoming a sealed system, a computer on wheels that required a diagnostic port rather than a good ear. The soul of the machine was still there, but it was beginning to speak a language of binary code rather than mechanical linkage. Yet, despite this digital creeping, the heart of the beast remained delightfully, stubbornly old-fashioned. If the Motronic system represented the encroaching future, the engine itself was a stubborn monument to the past. At the core of the 6 Series experience was the M30. Enthusiasts call it the Big Six. It is an engine that defines the difference between modern disposable engineering and the philosophy of permanence. In an era where engines are often hidden under plastic beauty covers to discourage anyone from looking at them, the M30 sits exposed in the bay. It is a monolith of cast iron. It is heavy, it is long, and it is virtually indestructible. The engineers designed this block with a thermal capacity that seems excessive by today's standards. It can absorb punishment that would warp a modern aluminum engine block. It features a single overhead camshaft and 2 valves per cylinder. There is no variable valve timing to fail. There are no complex turbochargers on the standard models to overheat. It produces power not through high revolutions per minute, but through displacement and torque. When you step on the accelerator of a 6 Series, you do not get the frantic buzz of a modern machine. You get a surge. It pulls with the steady, inevitable force of a diesel locomotive. It is a turbine-like delivery that makes the car feel faster than the numbers suggest. This sense of weight extends to every interaction the driver has with the cabin. Modern luxury is often defined by soft touch plastics and capacitive buttons that require no effort to press. The E24 defines luxury through mechanical resistance. When you reach for the window switch, you are not tapping a piece of flimsy plastic. You are engaging a heavy, rectangular rocker switch that sits in the center console. When you press it, there is a distinct, audible clunk. You can feel the contact closing. It feels industrial. It feels like a switch you would find in the cockpit of an airliner from the 1960s. The turn signal stalk is another study in tactile satisfaction. In a modern car, the stalk is often a lightweight wand that clicks vaguely. In the 6 Series, the stalk is a solid baton. Engaging the blinker requires a deliberate hand. It snaps into place with a heavy metallic precision. These components were not designed to be replaced after a 5-year lease. They were designed to outlast the owner. This is the quality of heft. It is the reassurance that the machine is working for you, and that the machine is substantial. This philosophy of over-engineering applied to the driveline as well. Many of these cars were equipped with the Getrag 265 manual transmission. It features a removable bell housing and a 3-piece case. It was rated to handle torque figures far higher than the engine could actually produce. The engineers built in a safety margin that ensured the transmission would likely never fail under normal use. It is a gearbox that rewards a firm hand. The shifts are not light and flickable like a Mazda Miata. They are long and deliberate. You guide the lever into the gate, and you feel the gears mesh together through the palm of your hand. Even the steering mechanism was a choice for stability over twitchiness. While the smaller 3 Series used a rack and pinion system, the 6 Series utilized a recirculating ball steering box. To a modern driver, this can feel vague on center, like there is a small delay between your hand and the wheels. But this was intentional. The recirculating ball system isolates the steering wheel from the shocks of the road. It was designed for the Autobahn. It allows the driver to sit at 130 miles per hour for hours on end without fighting the wheel against every expansion joint. It creates a sense of calm authority rather than nervous energy. This philosophy of thoughtful permanence extended to details so small that most owners never discovered them. There is a tiny white object, no bigger than a deck of cards, that every 6 Series was supposed to carry. If you know where to look, you might still find one. It represents something no modern manufacturer would ever consider. There is perhaps no better symbol of this thoughtful, comprehensive engineering than a small detail hidden in the glove box. To the left of the latch, there is a small white socket. When these cars were new, they were delivered with a white rectangular rechargeable flashlight that plugged directly into the car's electrical system. It was branded with the BMW roundel. It meant that if you broke down at night, the car provided the light to fix itself. It is a tiny detail, but it speaks volumes. It suggests that the manufacturer cared about the entire ownership experience, not just the driving dynamics. This combination of the bulletproof M30 engine and the robust mechanical build quality is the reason the E24 is still with us. Its contemporaries, like the Jaguar XJS with its complex V12 or the Maserati Biturbo, have largely disappeared from the roads. They were fragile, they were temperamental. When they broke, they were often too expensive or too difficult to fix. The BMW was different. It was an exotic shape with the heart of a tractor. It was special enough to love, but simple enough to keep alive. It occupied a sweet spot in history where the materials were top tier, but the complexity had not yet become unmanageable. But as the 1980s progressed, the definition of luxury began to shift again. The market began to demand more than just mechanical durability. It demanded excess, and BMW was about to make a move that would test the limits of the shark nose design. By 1987, the automotive landscape had shifted again. The austere days of the oil crisis were a distant memory, replaced by a booming economy where consumption was conspicuous and excess was celebrated. In the United States, which had become the most critical market for BMW, the definition of a flagship was changing. The American buyer did not just want a driving machine anymore. They wanted a living room on wheels. They wanted the prestige of the German badge combined with the creature comforts of a Cadillac. They wanted cup holders. They wanted ice-cold air conditioning that could freeze a side of beef. And above all, they wanted leather. BMW, always pragmatic, looked at this demand and decided to give the market exactly what it asked for. This decision birthed the Highline models, known in North America as the L6. The L6 was an experiment in total luxury. If the early cars were defined by their mechanical purity and restraint, the Highline was defined by its upholstery. BMW did not just put leather on the seat surfaces. They wrapped the entire interior in Napa cowhide. The dashboard was leather. The door casts were leather. The headliner was leather. Even the center console and the glove box door were stitched and wrapped. It was opulent. It smelled like an expensive handbag shop. It was a sensory overload intended to justify the astronomical price tag, which had now climbed well into the $50,000 range, a fortune in 1987. But there was a problem with this newfound luxury, one that would not reveal itself until the cars left the showroom. The E24 was designed in the 70s, an era of thin pillars and massive glass areas. It was a greenhouse. When you parked an L6 in the scorching sun of California or Texas, the interior became a kiln. The beautiful hand-stitched leather on the dashboard could not withstand the thermal assault. It began to shrink. It pulled away from the windshield, warping the vents and curling the edges of the glove box. The glue failed. The luxury literally unraveled before the owner's eyes. It was a stark lesson in material science. The synthetic dashboards of the lower trim models were virtually indestructible, but the premium organic material of the flagship was fragile. It was a metaphor for the era. It looked better in the showroom, but it lacked the permanence of the simpler past. The bloat was not just cosmetic. The manual Recaro seats of the early cars were replaced by massive, throne-like chairs packed with electric motors. They had memory functions and heating elements. They were incredibly comfortable, but they were heavy. They added hundreds of pounds to a chassis that was already over a decade old. And when the complex control modules failed, which they inevitably did, the seats would freeze in place, often trapping the rear passengers or making it impossible to drive if the last driver was a different height. The simplicity of a mechanical lever was gone, replaced by a bundle of wires and a repair bill that could rival the cost of an engine rebuild. This created a schism in the lineup. On one side, you had the L6, automatic only, heavy, soft, and wrapped in leather. It was a cruiser for the non-enthusiast. On the other side, you had the M6. The M6 was the spiritual successor to the race cars. It carried the S38 engine, a derivative of the legendary M1 supercar motor. It had individual throttle bodies and a hunger for revs. It was raw and angry. The simultaneous existence of the L6 and the M6 showed a company at a crossroads, trying to be two things at once, a purveyor of luxury goods and a guardian of motorsport heritage. The final blow to the car's athletic prowess came from the regulators. The introduction of the catalytic converter was mandatory for the United States market. To protect this delicate emissions equipment, the high-compression dirty engines of the European models had to be detuned. The compression ratio was dropped. The timing was retarded. The result was a loss of 36 horsepower. It was a significant tax paid for clean air. The United States models felt strangled compared to their European brethren. The sharp throttle response was dulled. The car was now heavier, softer, and weaker than the models that had built the legend a decade prior. It was still beautiful, but it had become a grand tourer in the truest sense, more suited to interstate cruising than canyon carving. The Shark had gained weight, and while it was more comfortable than ever, it was beginning to feel its age. But BMW had one final card to play. In the last 2 years of production, they made a change that finally restored the visual purity Paul Brock had fought for over a decade earlier. It was the Shark's redemption. As the decade wound down, the E24 received one final definitive update that secured its legacy. For the 1988 and 1989 model years, BMW introduced the world bumper configuration. For the previous decade, the North American models had been disfigured by massive elongated aluminum impact bumpers, derisively known as diving boards, which were mandated by US safety regulations. These protrusions ruined the delicate overhangs Paul Brock had originally sketched. The world bumper fixed this. It used a shortened body color design that integrated seamless shock absorbers, and it physically shortened the overall length of the car, finally restoring the tight, muscular proportions of the European specification to the American market. It was the ultimate visual expression of the chassis, combining the mature, rust-resistant engineering of the late 80s with the aesthetic purity of the mid-70s. It unified the global identity of the car, proving that the design could adapt to modern safety standards without losing its character. These final examples are now the most coveted, representing the best of both worlds that collectors chase. But this perfection was a farewell. In April 1989, the machinery at Dingolfing stopped. The Shark was dead. Its successor, the E31 8 Series, was already capturing headlines. The 8 Series was a tour de force of technology, boasting a V12 engine, complex multi-link rear axles, and pop-up headlights. It was faster, quieter, and objectively superior in every measurable metric. Yet it marked a profound philosophical departure. The 8 Series was the first car designed entirely using Kiad software. It was shaped by wind tunnel data that prioritized drag coefficients over emotional aggression. The signature forward slanting grille of the E24, a design trait that implied the car was leaning into the wind, hunting its prey, was abandoned. It was aerodynamic inefficiency, and the computers of the 1990s had no patience for such vanity. The Shark nose was a relic of a time when style could dictate function, a stubborn refusal to bow to the physics of air resistance. The end of the E24 also signaled the death of the greenhouse architecture. In the Shark, the belt line is incredibly low. The pillars are razor thin. When you sit behind the wheel, you are surrounded by glass. You are exposed to the environment, sitting in a cockpit that offers panoramic visibility. The cars that followed, starting with the 8 Series and the E36, began to raise the steel walls around the driver. The doors became thicker to house side impact beams. The pillars thickened to support rollover standards. The driver was moved from an observation deck into a bunker. We gained safety and silence, but we lost the sense of speed that comes from seeing the world rush by through a thin pane of glass. The E24 stands as the bridge between two distinct eras of human industry. It was born in the analog world of draftsmen, slide rules, and mechanical linkages. It survived into the dawn of the digital age, adopting fuel injection computers and ABS brakes. But it never lost its mechanical soul. It remains the last BMW where the driver was an integral component of the machine's operation, not just a requester of torque. In a modern vehicle, the gas pedal is a sensor that sends a request to a computer. In the Shark, a steel cable physically pulls the throttle body open. You feel the tension of the return spring in your foot. You are physically connected to the intake manifold. That direct vibrating line of communication is what makes the car feel alive. It represents a specific moment in time that cannot be replicated, not because we lack the technology, but because we have lost the philosophy. It was the final chapter of the analog flagship, a machine that demanded you drive it, rather than simply ride in it. The 6 Series journeyed from a raw, rust-prone sportsman to a leather-lined luxury cruiser, yet it never fully surrendered its soul to the microchip. It stands as a monument to a time when premium meant mechanical depth and material heft, not just a list of electronic features. We traded that tactile permanence for isolation, and the road has felt a little more distant ever since. If you miss the era when cars were built to last forever, subscribe to Good Old Things. We have more stories to tell.